Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where you are in the world. I'm Fred Plotkin in New York City, and I've been told to tell you that I have Wi-Fi issues today. So if my voice occasionally interrupts, my apologies. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on IDAGIO, the place where classical music happens. IDAGIO, as you know, is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. I am delighted to have my guest today. Uh, he's great. I'm going to be impartial because I think he's great, and I've wanted him to come for a while. It is Russell Thomas, tenor, joining me from, I believe, from his home. Welcome, Russell.
Hi, Fred. How are you?
Excellent. And so, Russell, I want you to know, number one, that I bought this shirt for you to wear today. It's the first time I'm wearing it because it's thematic. It's a Russell Thomas shirt. You are from South Florida, home of stone crabs. So there are stone crabs on the shirt. And also, I realize you're making waves in a good way.
Awesome.
So this is my Russell Thomas shirt. Um, Russell, I'm going to start by saying something that I know you'll understand, but I think other readers will and listeners will understand. You're what's known as a singer's singer. In other words, that not only are you admired by the public, but I know that many singers admire you. I'm just talking musically for the moment, for your gifts, your insights, plural, your approach to your music, to singing, and so on. And typically on this program, I don't get really technical with singers about singing, but if you'll indulge me and if you're interested, I would like to do that a bit with you because, simply put, you sing a very wide range of tenor repertory, much wider, I think, than many of your colleagues. And you do it all incredibly well. I've heard you sing Tamino in the Magic Flute in Die Zauberflöte, which is a lyrical Mozartian role. You've been the Duke of Mantua, very lyrical. You have sung very dramatic roles, Oedipus Rex by Stravinsky, and Berlioz's Faust, and uh, Fidelio. You've sung Florestan. I heard you do that in Cincinnati in a fabulous production I want to talk to you about. Um, you cover a vast amount of music. Is your approach to singing, and I mean technique right now, the same for all this music, or does one have to adapt to different styles based on what the music is by doing different things with your technique?
I think I try to make it the same for everything I sing. I think if you have an efficient, healthy emission vocally, that you can sing anything. I talk to the people I teach and say the same thing. You want to just have a technique that can serve the music. And no matter what style you're singing in, no matter what music you're singing, and it's always changing. The voice is always changing depending on how you feel on any given day. That also changes. But the one thing that should be constant, I think, is the approach. The approach technically to what you're doing, and hopefully that allows you to service the music and the drama in the best possible way.
So let's start by talking strictly on the musical approach before we get into concepts of drama, whether it's informed by your musicianship or by your approach to words and acting. Let's have a master class. How I'm going to start with basic questions as if I knew nothing about singing because people don't always know how it's done. How do you place your tongue to configure your mouth? And if I'm not using the right vocabulary, correct me, to get the best emission, in other words, production of good sound.
For me, it's to leave it alone and to not. The tongue shapes the vowels. You might find some singers do a lot with the jaw to form the words or to form the vowels. And sometimes in my own singing, if I ever feel myself getting a little tight, you may see me wiggle. on my jaw a bit in a performance. But for me, the tongue is just in the most relaxed position in the mouth, and usually it's just relaxed low. For some singers, they talk about it touching the back of the bottom teeth, but I don't really think in those terms. I just leave it alone. If I find that there's something or a time in my singing where the tongue gets a little stressed because of a note, or I'm tired, or when singers are tired, we do a lot of funky stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with technique, but it sort of makes you focus again technically when you're a little tired. And then I will pay attention to where my tongue is and how my tongue is reacting as I'm singing. And I may make an effort to keep it relaxed and touching the bottom gums, so to speak. But
So,
it's always
yeah,
relaxed.
but the tongue, we're talking now about sound emission, but the tongue also is involved in pronunciation of words. So I'm going to take the role of Florestan and Fidelio. Your very first word is got with a very hard T where the tongue has to go up to the roof of the mouth and then it has to be released. But then later you say words such as Namen, Namen, Lose, Freude, where the tongue doesn't really get in the way. When you are saying got and have other T's in there, mein Engel Leonoren, the L goes up there like that. It must change the way the sound is produced, or maybe it doesn't, compared to words like Namen, Namen, Lose, Freude.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. It should all be. There's a. It's what's weird about singing is that people often talk about it in a technical way, and I don't think that there's a singing, I don't know, technique, because I feel like if there was a technique, so to speak, you could read a book and everybody would know how to do it. That's not quite how I see singing. It's very individual from person to person. But I find that, for instance, to make the got, it's it's at the very last minute, and it's just using the tongue to stop the air to make a plosive T. It's not that your tongue is doing anything special. You just put it there to sort of make a stop, as if I were playing a trumpet. The same thing. I would take the tongue and put it between my lips to stop the airflow for for a staccato note or something, for a stop. It's the same thing. It just shouldn't be so active, that it should be active, but not so active that it gets in the way of the emission vocally. So that's why I say it's very relaxed. It's a release. It should never be primary in that production. It's all about height and space for me. And the way I think of singing is about height and space. And the tongue is used merely for the formation of text, not to necessarily produce sound, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So singers have to breathe, and
Yep.
often they have to breathe while they are singing. And when I look at a musical score, sometimes there are places where the composer has put in a spot to breathe. But if it's Rossini or certain other people, they tend to laugh at the singer and say, no, no breath. And they they just don't seem to have a spot to breathe. How does a singer breathe and sing at the same time? Or how do you get breath in and then out?
That's funny. I don't think that it's possible to be, one of the people that I submitted for for my list of listening was Charlie Neidich, the great clarinetist. Because the way I got to know him and fell in love with him, he was playing this Messian piece, and he he did this thing that I later learned was called circular breathing, where he could breathe and play at the same time. Singers can't really do that, but you gauge the air. It's like a compressor. Your body is used as a compressor on a air pump, or or your air conditioning, and you basically gauge how much air you release at any given time to sustain a phrase. So if you want to have a really long Rocky Blake, phrase that just sort of goes on and on and on forever, it's about how you engage those muscles and how you release the air, so you can, how do you call it? So you can sustain the breath, or one breath, for a longer amount of time. It's not necessarily this idea of of cyclical breathing as a clarinetist is able to do. I don't know if all of them are. I know that Charlie Nidus can do it, and I was always very impressed by that. But I don't think it's something that singers can do. I think physiologically it's almost impossible.
Did you by any chance study clarinet or a wind instrument when you were coming up?
I studied trumpet.
Okay. How
I
does
studied
that serve you?
musically it serves me quite well. I think to just the way I hear a phrase, sometimes I even find myself, like when I'm thinking about pitches, doing this,
Mhm.
just because that sort of was my training. I can't play the piano very well, so my training was always, as a young man, was on trumpet.
I ask because you have two clarinet pieces on your listening list, which I will get to later. That was my instrument when I was a kid, the clarinet.
Good.
And it's a beautiful instrument. It's a challenge because of the breathing issues. My father was a professional musician who was a trombonist,
Okay.
and his breathing was, excuse me, a lot better than mine. And his particular gift that he was renowned for among the gifts on the trombone was that he could, in effect, sing an aria with the trombone. And if he was singing Celliste Aida, or if he was singing O du holder Abendstern from Tannhäuser, he somehow managed to get that character into the way he, quote, sang on the trombone. Now, he didn't emit any words,
Right.
but you could, if you knew the lyric, you could hear how my dad was coloring the tone and so on. And much of what I learned initially about singing and breathing, I actually learned from having someone in the house practicing 6 hours a day, every day by my cradle. And so I'm very mindful of that, as opposed, say, to singers who study a string instrument and
Right.
their sense of bowing and how the bowing is like the breath. And I think it would be an interesting thing. Maybe you and I can do this sometime in front of an audience, to get different instrumentalists up in front of us with singers, young artists, and have them mirror each other, one instrument with one singer, to see how the breathing and the expressivity in a wind instrument or a bowed instrument influences how the singer sings. And I raise this in part because um, one of your roles is one of my very favorite operas, and I heard you do it once. That was Tito, Titus, and La Clemenza di Tito. I unfortunately did not get to see you in Salzburg or Amsterdam because there was a flight issue or whatever, but I didn't get there and I had tickets. Um, but that opera is full of clarinet because Mozart had just discovered the clarinet. In effect, Stadler in 1790 created the modern clarinet, and Mozart used it very effectively in La Clemenza and the clarinet concerto and a lot of the last music he wrote in 1791. Um, do you, as a singer, hear the instruments in an orchestra for your roles and for other roles? And are you influenced by the choices that the composers made in which instruments to have at certain moments?
I'm very cognizant of it. I think, especially if there are moments where we play together or sing together, that's a very important thing to me. And I often, if I can meet with the clarinetist or meet with an instrumentalist, is just to say, "Hey, what's your breathing here? How are you? Are you? Have you thought already about that phrasing there?" So that if there was like a duet moment, I can think about how I want to phrase that in that particular performance or group of performances with that instrumentalist. Sometimes, as you are well aware, you rehearse with one musician and then there may be somebody else on the day of a performance.
Yeah.
So that's not always something that we can do. Um, but in Salzburg, for instance, we played with the wonderful orchestra from Russia, from Perm, and it was, there it was very chamber music. Like we were all sort of interacting together and figuring out the phrasing and the breaths and how we were going to work together, to produce that music, again, akin to chamber music. And yeah, it's very important to me to have those conversations, to pay attention to the relationship, why that instrument was used instead of another one. Why is there a trombone, with my vocal line and not a trumpet or not a cello or not an oboe. Um, those all sort of influence the way I like to think about singing and process information and how I produce a sound. Sometimes.
What is a hard palate? What is a soft palate?
The hard palate is the bony part of the roof of your mouth. Soft palate is, I often tell my students to to roll the tip of your tongue from your teeth up to the where the hard palate meets the soft palate, and you feel that ridge. After that ridge is soft, and before it is hard.
And you'll see where I'm going. Do the inside of the cheeks do anything?
What do you mean by do anything? Don't
Do
even.
they contribute to the making of the sound or the phrasing or the
Oh, I think so.
echoing?
I think so. It's all a chamber. It's all a
Yeah.
chamber. But I think the the resonators, the bones that are in your face, sort of do most of the work. But the color of your voice is the space and the tissue and all that other stuff. How long your neck is and how wide it is, and all those things inform your the color of your instrument. That makes it individual.
What I want listeners to know is it's already a given that the singer has a voice. And you have to start with that premise, but that everything we've been talking about thus far is in addition to the gift of the voice, where one can, with luck and a great deal of study and preparation, become a great singer.
I think it's more the artistry, these other things. I think technique can do but so much. I mean, there are a lot of people who have a very who have a technical facility that don't really, for lack for that don't really say anything to me. You know what I mean?
I do.
There's singers with amazing technical facility. They can do every single thing, but they have nothing to say. And I think that these things, and thinking about what instruments are playing when you're singing, and how that instrument is phrased and why that instrument, and if they and basically pay attention. If I showed you one of my scores, every single crescendo that's in a piano vocal score on a few notes, I know which instrument that crescendo was for, or what subito piano that instrument was for. It informs my music making. Um, I don't think it will make me a better singer. It makes me a better artist, and I think that that's what's important for me.
So, speaking just now about music and sound and not words, which we'll get to, what do you, Russell, find within and between the notes that gets your sound, your expressivity, your artistry to be what it is?
Hmm.
Because
I
I know the Russell Thomas sound. That's something. There are certain few singers, not just in opera, but in all fields, where I know that sound. When I'm on opera quizzes and they say, name it in three notes, I can do Russell Thomas in one.
but there's um I use the what's on the page um as a guide, and we're talking about just musically. So when, again, as I said, if there's a crescendo written on a few notes in a score, I want it, or a subito piano or a fortissimo, but a forte only on this one line. I know that there's an instrument that's probably given that directive, and I want to know what instrument that is, and then try to hear it in a texture. And for me, the color that I try to find is all, if there's a subito piano written there or something on the vocal line or underneath me, because in Mozart and a lot of the other earlier composers, they didn't write dynamic markings for the singer, because the singer sort of just took on the in the context of the work. Not, they didn't need their own directive, to sing piano or forte here. They followed what was in the orchestra. And so I try my hardest to go and look in the score and figure out what instrument and where, and then I try to decide why, because I can't call Leoncavallo or Puccini or Mozart and ask them. So I try to figure out for myself why that is and what that means, and how I will allow it to influence. And then there's the text, which we haven't started talking about yet, that also is a guide to influence. And when you add the text in, if you just had notes there and no words, and you're just figuring out the context. You can make or create a sound world or a character just from that. But we're so lucky as singers that we have words, so those words can even indicate even more how, or influence even more how we should sing any given phrase or any given note at any given time. That's our blessing and our curse, because words can sometimes get in the way for some singers technically, but for me it's always the guide.
Every singer I talk to has a different approach to the following question, namely, when you look at, let's say, an art song, not an aria, because an aria is about theater as much as anything else, but lead or chanson or spiritual, any song that unites words and music to say something. Do you start with the music? Do you start with the words? Do you do both together? Do you sit down at the piano and or have someone else sit at the piano? How do you start?
The words, I translate the words first. It's no matter what I'm singing, be it an aria or anything else, I translate the words first. I speak the text and feel the way the text feels in my mouth. I read the English with, because that's my primary language. Then I read it, the phrase in Italian or German or French, then in English, and feel the inflections that I can give the text there. Then I look at the music, and before I even think about the notes, it's more, what are the dynamics that are there? What's happening underneath me? Is there an accelerando there, or is there a retard there? What's happening musically in the ebb and flow of the piece, which influences how much time I have to say that word. And within that time, you can only do but so much, or you have a lot of time and you can do a whole lot. And it's making those choices under the constraints, so to speak, of the text and the tempo and the words and the music. It all sort of ties in together. But that prima le parole line has always been something that stuck to me from a very early age. The words come
Prima
first.
le parole, poi la musica, first the words, then the music,
Yeah.
which Richard Strauss enshrined. My next question was a little bit about Richard Strauss and Handel. Have you sung Handel in public?
Only Messiah, and recently Total Eclipse, for
Samson.
Samson, for
Isn't that the best name of an aria of all arias, Total Eclipse?
it really is. And I heard it for the first time and learned it basically from listening to John Vickers sing it. He always sang it in recitals, and um, it was, and he just took his time with it in a very grandiose but very touching way, and it's always sort of spoke to me. And I sang it for the first time only in a couple of months ago.
No moon, no stars. I just love that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm actually young enough, Russell, and I began as a baby in opera that I worked with John Vickers on that production of Samson with
So
Carol Van Ness and Let the Bright Seraphim. It was a marvelous production in the 80s at the Met when I really was in my early 20s. And he typically sang roles that had more dramatic heft and vocal heft, Aeneas, Radames, things like that, Othello. But he always sang as John Vickers, if you know what I mean. And that's not a criticism, but he always sang as John Vickers in Canio and Florestan, you name it. Russell Thomas, there's a much wider spectrum of vocal presence and interpretation and character and personality,
well,
which I kind of love, which is not a criticism of John Vickers, because God forbid anyone should criticize John Vickers, because he would let you have it. But and I admired him, but he was not the easiest person to work with, but I really admired him. You, on the other hand, there's a much broader spectrum of presentation and personality, which I think is a great thing and maybe a modern thing. Am I wrong in thinking it's more modern?
I don't know if I necessarily call it more modern, but I think for myself, um, you have these artists that we all know that we call, we consider them to be great singing actors. John Vickers is probably for tenors the greatest singing actor, maybe next to Neil Shikoff. That's a great singing actor as well. But there's a physical histrionic approach to the acting, um, like a Maria Callas, for instance. There's a physical histrionic approach to the acting and to the presentation of text that I don't have for whatever reason. So mine has to be more intellectual and studious, and how much I can do it with my throat instead of with the physicality. You know, you I think of a Thomas Hampson, for instance. I think of a Leontine Price. I think of these artists that did it with the color and the words and the way they produce text, and not and the colors of their voices, not necessarily with physical histrionics. You know what I mean?
I do, but you and Thomas Hampson and Leontine Price, and I will add Jesse Norman, all have so much presence on the stage. I'll name another one, Kiri Takanawa, who unfortunately people who don't get her call her things like Dreary Kiri and that she's boring and so on. Anything but. She has so much presence and charisma and engagement that she could stand stock still and
Yes.
be the most alluring Arabella or Marschallin or Countess, or you name the role, Fiordiligi,
Yeah.
without, I don't want to say without having to act, but part of her was the stillness
Yeah.
that
And that
you as an audience member went to her rather than she pushing it out to you.
and Fred, that's one of the things I would say is a goal of mine, is to be able to find that stillness and bring people in. But I think on the spectrum of presenting oneself in an opera, that's not always what people want. They want you to do stuff, and stuff means you're doing, like, you're acting. The singer that looks like he's working really hard is a singer that people usually are drawn to. Sometimes. I don't want to look like I'm working very hard. It should feel. I want it to feel easy. I want it to look easy, even if it's not. That for me is my goal. To make it sort of look like I just woke up and was able to do this. And God knows we can't just wake up and just do it. So back to that original point, the point that I make is that because I don't do those things physically, that I think an audience has grown accustomed to seeing, um, then I have to do it with the music and with my voice, and find ways to use the text to serve the music and to serve the presentation and to do all of those things. And I think sometimes I'm very successful at it, and other times not so much. But that's always the objective. It's like, how do I think very intently on how I'm going to sing a phrase. I mark it, I map it out. It's not by chance, but sometimes you want to make it look like it is, but it's never by chance with me. It's always planned. And I'm always open to interpretation or open to changing those things in a rehearsal process. But I really do sit down, with a score, and really map those things out.
Um, to those people who would say that they want to see the singer sweat and work and so on, I would push back and say that Maria Callas, famous actress, never did anything extra. And she never did anything that was not called for and appropriate. And that her acting was great acting, but it was not diva, whatever we want to call that to be. It was always right for the music, the character, the conductor she was working with, typically with the artist she was singing with on the stage. Then you had one of my very favorites, with whom I was blessed to work with a lot, Leone Rezanek, who was in, I won't say every way, but very often over the top, but not in a bad sense. She could turn up that emotional meter to 150,000, and it never felt over the top. It was just at an intensity that most other singers and actors can never achieve.
Yeah.
But with her, it was right, and audiences would go delirious when she did that because it was not fake, it was not imposed.
Right.
And so, Russell, the first time I heard you was at the Met, I mean, was in Don Carlo as a herald. The first time I heard you and noticed you was in Fidelio, which was your next role, where you were one of the prisoners. And it's a short role, but it's beautiful music.
Yeah.
And I thought of this just now because another artist who I want her to come on this program one day, and we're in touch, who I adore and revere the way I do you, let's be blunt, is Carita Matila.
Okay.
And so there you were as a young artist in 2006 with her on the stage. Would you just talk about the impact of her as an artist and a colleague, and but especially what you as a young man relatively new in the profession got from watching her work in her amazing performance as Leonora?
Well, I think for me, I got to watched her before that actually when she was singing. Sorry, that's my doorbell camera. So someone's walking by in front of my yard. I got to experience her and watch her during a production of Salome, and I
Oh,
went to all of those rehearsals. And I don't know if that was my first or second year in the Lindemann program. And watching her work and the intensity was always, stunning. I mean, it was just always there was always this intense feeling, and I would think like, how does she? And then she'd get up and she'd just walk away like nothing ever happened. But it always looked like she was so invested physically and emotionally in every detail and nuance of the work, and that's something I admire greatly. Then you have these artists like, then you had her in Fidelio, and I think there was a whole that was a whole situation because I think Levine was supposed to conduct, and it was one of those times that he had gotten hurt or something, maybe in Boston, if I'm not mistaken, and then he canceled, and then there was an assistant conductor, and the
Paul
situation was
Nadler.
okay. Yes,
Yeah.
Nadler. The situation I think was just very different, and I remember watching her be kind of frustrated in the situation. It wasn't what she she was expecting and what she was wanting to do, um, and that's also another part of a great artist, figuring out how to make it work in that situation. And I don't think she's saying, if I recall correctly, I think she may be saying opening night and maybe one other performance, and she didn't do any more because the situation just wasn't one where she felt like she could produce, I think, her best work. So, and again, I understand that, but again, it was all learning lessons for me as a young artist, to know, or to watch an artist just try to give her best work, and the circumstance or situation doesn't allow for whatever reason. Um, yeah, I mean, I adore her. I absolutely adore her. Her getting a Twitter account was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Listeners, everybody sign up for Carita Matila's Twitter account. It'll make your day.
Absolutely, and she now lives in Florida, where I'm from, which I think, which I love, which I absolutely.
There was one detail in that production that was not your character, because your character was not fed any food. But this Leonora, for reasons I don't understand, I did like the production, at a certain point was required to peel and eat a banana. And I know from my singer friends that it's a challenge to eat foods on the stage. And typically you guys eat apples because somehow they digest well, or grapes. Luca Pizzaroni, who's a vegetarian, when he's in eating scenes, has to basically shave everything, carve everything that's an apple to look like, a peach, or not a peach, but a turkey.
Right,
But having to peel and eat a banana, there's no way around that.
right.
And I imagine, I need to ask her this, did the banana what did it do to the throat? What could it do to the throat?
I mean, it depends on each singer. I'm not. I hate bananas. So so if I and they make my throat itch. There may be some allergy there. So I would never want to do that on stage. I couldn't imagine having to do it. But some singers eat bananas before they go on stage. You know, it's a thing for some singers. It calms them, or it produces some kind of something that makes them calm,
Well,
or
actually, the potassium is a good energy boost, and it regulates the system. That is true. Um, so I'm just thinking about singers and what they eat before a show or during a show. One very famous American tenor used to chomp on ice cubes, not ice water, but we would have ice cubes in the wings for him at the Met, and he'd come off stage having just sung, and he would cool his throat by, he must have had great teeth, chewing on ice cubes and breaking them in his mouth, and then it would go down his throat. Birgit Nielsen, and I witnessed this, and I once served her this, would drink a beer in the wings from a bottle and would burp and then go right back out on the stage again and sing Brunhilde or whatever. Is there any particular thing that you consume, drink or food before, during, right after?
No, but I'm an ice cube chewer though. I definitely not necessarily during a show, but I like cold water. So
Okay.
the dresser would always have a bottle of water for me in a freezer and bring it to me. But at home I am an ice cube chewer. Yes,
Okay. I couldn't envision doing that, but okay.
they're
I
cold.
do like cold beverages, but I mean, I asked because when I've worked on productions, when I've managed theaters and so on, I always get a list ahead of time because I asked for it from the artists to know what they like and don't like.
Okay.
Because I mean, the range is huge. We're all human. There was one artist who, let's call her very particular, only wanted certain kinds of soap, which I understand because of allergens, but it could only be oval and not rectangular. Not always that easy to secure. And one time I bought a rectangular one and took it to the scene shop and had them carve it into an oval. And you know the artist, I won't say it on the air. But I want to go back a few steps to what I was talking about regarding the palate and the nose and so on, because you know, Russell, that I, in addition to my opera work, do a lot of food and wine work and teach tasting and savoring and so on. And I often use music, singers especially, I will play it while people are tasting, because it's a similar thing. Let's say we're tasting a wine or a cheese, but let's start with the wine. The wine would go on the tongue and into the cheeks. That's why I asked you. And then would be warmed by the cheeks. And then you raise the tongue to the roof, to the hard palate. And then the fragrance and the taste permeates the nose and the cavities here and up there, just like singing. And you let it fade, kind of like the way music will fade away. And then you get what's called the retrogusto, which is not the aftertaste. Aftertaste means that you're nauseated, but all the sensations that come after. And it's
Right.
kind of like when I listen to you, because you resonate in theaters, your voice is that I can hear you and keep hearing you. And there's a lot of retrogusto when you sing. Resonance, I guess we would call it if I had to use that word,
Yeah.
but certainly not echoing. I don't mean that at all, but that it remains, it permeates, it's felt. There are certain singers who have that. Ava Martone is one, where it remains, and it's kind of thrilling when that happens. And there are others certainly, but she and you are two examples of that, where you, I just don't want you singing fast music. Because I want it to, keep expanding and resonating and going deep and so on. Do you, when you taste food, and I was talking about wine, but now let's take a piece of cheese that is a softish piece of cheese, let's say a brie or camembert, better, and it's soft, so it goes in the cheeks, and then you would bring it up to the roof of the mouth, the hard palate, and maybe feel it without gagging in the soft palate. But again, up here, not in the eyes, we hope, because then you cry. But it's a very similar thing. It's a very, not sensuous, but sensorial experience. And I experience that with singers. I often experience that with orchestral music. I certainly experience that with food. And I will just add one more thing. When I do this, my feet are firmly planted on the floor. They're not sort of bent or toes up or anything like that, because the grounding, plus in the case of singers, the resonance is quite something. So for me, music and food are a total body experience, even
I,
if I'm alone.
I agree. I agree with that, but but there's something. Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily take time, except for when there's a really beautiful meal that I know was prepared for that reason. You know, I don't know if I often take time to enjoy those sensations, those sensory sensations, as you describe. I love fancy cheeses. I don't even know what they are most of the time, and or how one's supposed to enjoy them. But I often go to these cheese shops, and I'll just ask whoever's there. I want something soft, or I want a brie, or give me a really nice one. Not like a grocery store
Mhm.
level brie, but give me a really nice one. And I quite enjoy cheese and wine not so much, but I love a Malbec, an Argentinian Malbec. I don't know if, again, I'm not a wine connoisseur, so I don't really know if it's what's a good one versus a bad one, but I know when I taste them if I really enjoy them versus not.
I recently did a program with Jamie Barton, not on this show, but for San Francisco Opera, called Dining on the Rhine, in which she and I basically, she in her home not far from you, and me in my home in New York, um, created 4 meals, one for Rheingold, one for Valkyra, one for Siegfried, and one for Gotterdammerung, which had a lot of fire in that meal, and water. And she had a glass of Rhine wine in her home, and which she consumed. I don't drink when I'm working, but she did not let it stop her. And at a certain point, and she expressed very beautifully about the sensations of the wine. So I realized that she and I were aligned in this. But then I selected a cheese, Morbier, that has ashes in it because there's the ash tree in Valkyra, and I pick symbols for everything in the ring cycle. I, for 30 years, have done ring dinners like this. And she told me that for her, Morbier is her favorite cheese because of the ash and the contrast between the creaminess and the slight smokiness and so on. And it was a phenomenal experience talking to her, because here was a singer, a wonderful singer, who also seemed to get those sensorial things,
Right.
which I know that you do too.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel that with you, though you and I have never discussed. We've only had one meal together. It was in Washington, but I was not paying attention to what we ate or what you ate. Um, this leads me to something. I didn't plan this direction, but here we go, since we're talking about the ring. Um, Not too long ago in social media, there was a posting, I forget by which Black artist, in which he or she was talking about having more Black artists sing the ring cycle. So I took it upon myself to create a Black ring, which I sent to you, where you're Zygmunt, and all of the artists are what Larry Brownlee calls persons of African descent. And now I'm really motivated to make this happen, at least as a recording, because the more I've let this settle in my mind, it was not just a caprice and a game,
Yeah.
but it really is something worth doing. If ever I get to stage it, I don't want to make it a gimmicky production, setting it in Wakanda or something like that, but really follow the story, but just have these glorious voices. Would you be up for Zygmunt?
I would. I think it sits a bit low for my voice, but yeah, I think I would be up for that. I think I'd definitely be up for that.
Because I cast Angel Blue as Siglinda.
that that would all that would be all. See, that's also is like who are we cast with? You know,
Morris Robinson as Hunding.
that works.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Eric Owens as Wotan.
I like it.
Okay. Valkyra.
Alfred, Alfred Walker would be also an amazing Votan.
Yes. It's true. The thing is, it's not that I need to shoehorn people in. We have this embarrassment of riches among the selection.
Yeah,
So Morris Robinson actually cast in 3 roles and he wanted 4.
I've, I've been trying to get Morris Robinson to sing to sing Dutchman, but he won't do it. He doesn't believe me when I tell him that he'd be an amazing Dutchman. His
He would
presence,
be.
his voice, and he has a great command of the upper ranges of his bass voice, which I think would be awesome. It reminds me a lot of Simon Estes in that way. Although Simon Estes also sang pure baritone repertoire that Morris wouldn't do. But he reminds me of that, and I think he'd be an awesome, awesome Dutchman. Yeah,
I don't know if you saw my guest last week was Mark Rucker, the baritone and wonderful teacher. And he sang the Dutchman, and he told me that he was inspired and influenced by Simon Estes in the role, though Simon's voice is lower.
yeah,
The middle of the voice is certainly lower than Mark Rucker.
right.
So when you say that Zygmunt is a little low for you, talk about what that means for someone who's not a musician.
Well, the tessitura, the center of gravity, so where the role sort of sits, isn't in a place where my voice necessarily shines, or that my voice, shows off the best parts. For me, D on the staff and above, that's sort of my bread and butter. Um, but for the singer that usually sings something like Siegmund, they don't like to sit up in the top of their ranges, and there are some exceptions, of course. But generally, the singer that if you see a singer that has a healthy diet of Zygmunds, the chances are that they don't really like singing very high, uh, or people who hire them don't want to hear them sing very high. Um, so for me, that's usually not the case. I can handle the upper ranges of my voice very fairly decently, so I don't think that that Ziegmund would really show off what I can do there in terms of the lyricism of the part, in terms of the text and how I would handle those things. I think I would be great. A very big opera company asked me to consider that one, 2 of them actually, and I turned it down. But for that ring, I definitely consider it.
Yes, I've already designed the album cover, so we got to do it. um, you wrote back to me and you said I would do Fro. I believe that was the role you said,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is a
yeah.
relatively small role.
Loga, I think. Loga.
Logo.
Yeah.
And I think you wrote for because I had cast Freddie Ballantyne as Logo, but
Oh yeah, maybe I thought because I said maybe you should that Isakaya or Lemmy should be the Lemmy Pulliam could be the Siegmund, and I'll just sing Fro. I think is what I said. I said give one of those guys Siegmund and let me just sing Fro. I can
yeah.
scream at the top for a little bit and not have to have any pressures of the part.
And then all you have to do is walk up a rainbow bridge and goodbye. But I wanted you to have this big lyrical part. That's why. Um, but we do have quite a ways to go on this. I noticed that Black men with deeper voices tend to get cast more in the rings, either as occasionally Wotan as they should. Alberic, Eric Owens was a magnificent Alberic. Hagen, the Giants.
Yeah.
But I've not yet seen too many black tenors appearing in some of the tenor roles in the ring, and I would like to see that.
I mean, I think that would be great. It's never been one that sort of the only role in any of that that probably interests me is Siegfried and Siegfried, and not because of any reason other than I think it has to be a fun role, but I can only imagine how daunting it is to sing. I remember seeing. John Frederick West sing it, and I just thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever experienced in my life. And it was the only time I saw that opera live, and I enjoyed watching it, and I didn't fret for whoever was singing the part, because, as I said earlier, he makes it look easy, even if it isn't. He makes it look easy. He just looked like a kid having fun and playing on stage, and I adored that, and it was an awesome experience for me. But the ring cycle, I don't think has a whole lot for me. Give me Tannhäuser, give me even Parsifal, which also has a lower center of gravity. But in terms of what it requires with the text and intellectually, I think I would have a lot to offer in terms of Parsifal. Tannhäuser, I just want to sing it. So it's just one of the
Okay, so here we go. Tannhäuser is far and away my favorite Wagner opera.
mine as well.
Far and away. Mr. Vickers, I once discussed it with him, and he yelled at me that, you know, Tannhäuser is a sinner and he's evil and heathen and all that. And I said, excuse me, Mr. Vickers. He was one of the few artists who was always Mr. Vickers, who was not John. Once it was John. And I said, but you sing Siegmund, who has sex with his sister and and produces a child. Tannhäuser doesn't do any of that. And Vickers said something interesting. He said, well, in the ring cycle, these are all gods and mortals, but they're not, and I know this too, they're not cognizant of religion. He
Right.
said Tannhäuser is a Christian opera, and it's about the interplay of Christian faith, or the abandoning of Christian faith, or the rationalizing or coming to terms with, I don't want to characterize for anyone else, but it's certainly about grappling, I think is the word, with one's Christian faith if one is a Christian. And I said, I would love to have seen you grapple. I think it would have been a fascinating performance. And then he said to me, it's too high.
I mean, but he sang a lot of Tristan, didn't he?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, and I would think that it's, well, I guess Tristan isn't as high. I mean, it isn't as high a role, but it's a pretty high role. But it's a very long role. Tristan is so. That's interesting. That's interesting that he thought it was too high.
Yeah, I think he was half kidding, but really not, because he could have sung. I mean, he sang the toughest roles. He sang Aeneas.
Yeah, which is quite high, but it's
Yeah,
short.
which
But it's very short.
true, but it's tough. I mean, I'm not a tenor, so I can't judge. But to me, Aeneas would be tough in different ways than Tannhäuser.
Yeah.
But so let's really get into this role. It's the Wagner opera I teach most. I teach singers, I teach audiences. It's my home plate for me, basically. Why Tannhäuser?
I think it's the most singable of all the Wagner roles. I think it's the most singable. It requires really it requires beautiful singing, and I think that's unlike many of the others. Parsifal is also one of those that requires a very beautifully sung performance. But Tannhäuser, of all the Helden tenor parts, for me, is that role. It requires just this beautifully sung role, and I think as a character, he really does have a full, from beginning to the end, he has a full journey. Not a lot of operatic characters really have that journey, especially tenors. They don't really have that journey.
He
And
goes to Rome and back.
yeah, right. He has that, be it psychological or spiritual or whatever that journey is, he as a character has it. And there's something um, touching about it from the very beginning. Who has not been, you know, I don't know, I won't say victim or gotten tied up in excesses of be it sex, food, whatever it is. Who can't relate to that? It's a very human situation. It's so human. The same with Othello for me. It's like the most human character in that show for me is Othello because he has the real journey of emotion of life, and I think that's the same for Tannhäuser. You know.
So I do want to save Otello for a bit, but let's stick to Tannhäuser for now, but we will get to Otello. Um, I it's such a challenging opera, not just musically for the tenor, although it certainly is that, because it is so open to bad interpretation by stage directors, more
Well,
than most operas.
but all operas are these days. You
Oh, but
know?
especially Tannhäuser and Rigoletto to me are the two that just cannot catch a break from stage directors, because they're either embarrassed by the ideas or don't really want to plumb them, or feel that they're not relevant, that in a time like now where people can be more open and have more options about their sexual choices and their entanglements and engagements, it may not be so, quote, shocking.
Right.
But to me, Tannhäuser, well, when I'm asked to name my favorite operas and roles, again, as an opera lover and opera worker, but not a singer, I tend to name Tito, Andrea Chenier, Fidelio the opera, Tannhäuser, and just a few others. And what all these have in common are tenor roles, or men who are thinking, feeling, imperfect, but who rise above the murk of their emotional turmoil to a certain kind of clarity and realization and catharsis, if you wish, in one way or another. And to me, Titus in one very beautiful way, but Tannhäuser similarly, just really nail it. And I'm getting goosebumps now as I think about it. I get goosebumps every time at the end of that opera, many times, but at the end, Heilige Elisabeth, bitte für mich, as he falls dead, and then the chorus comes in. I'm really getting all and the chorus comes in, and they lift the staff that the Pope said, you Tannhäuser are condemned unless it blooms, and it blooms, of course. And people who interpret Wagner as always be about women sacrificing for men don't, I think, get the subtlety of this opera.
Yeah.
That, to me, there are no bad characters
No, no, no.
at all.
Yeah.
Venus is a very gratified and gratifying woman. She's very generous. She has a winery. She has a business. It all works. And if you like this, come on in.
Right.
It's like the best little whorehouse on the Rhine with better beverages. And then Wolfram is a caring, good, conscientious person who is so magnanimous and so understanding, and his notion of love is not Tannhäuser's or Elizabeth or Venus's, but it's valid too. And we know many people like that in life who are not as extravagant in their demonstrations of who they are, what they feel, but nonetheless are completely valid and humane. He's a very important anchor in the opera. Elizabeth, though 18, goes on to such wisdom, and it's not just sacrifice, and it may not just be heartbreak. It may be that she achieves wisdom the way no other Wagner woman does until Brunhilde. And I think that that's a very important aspect of her role. And it's through her wisdom, not through her sacrifice, so to speak, that Tannhäuser learns. And in the orchestral parts of his character, you can hear the conflicting temptations. That's what Wagner did so brilliantly, that you can hear his mind in the orchestra.
Yes.
And the way very few other characters in all of opera, you can hear it so clearly. And with all of the sfumature, how do we say that in English? All the coloring, shadings, and contradictions
Yeah.
that happen in his mind and in his soul. And so I'm really glad, Russell, to hear that this is on your list, because you will be a magnificent one. And believe me, my phone and my Zoom are available to you anytime to talk about this character. Have you thought about him somewhat?
Not as much as I will when I finish learning the score, because I am studying the score right now. But it's one of those that I have to take my time with, because I don't think you can sing that and sing something else at the same time. So when I'm working on Tannhäuser is when I'm not doing anything else. And for me, it's like bit by bit. But I've gotten the entire first Venus Tannhäuser stuff all learned and singing it. So I've thought about it in that context. Step by step. Right now, I'm in that first act realm. We'll see how it keeps going on to the next scenes. The song contests and all those things. Do it with Venus and the big ensemble.
See,
The big ensembles is what makes that role very difficult. Actually, it's not. It's not any of the solo singing when he's by himself. It's those huge ensemble parts. Maybe the Rome narration is a bit taxing, but that's only because how long it is, not necessarily because it does anything that's difficult.
I would have you look at the video of Johann Botha doing the Rome narrative, because
I
you'll be able to hear what he did and where he reserved and where he put forth. He did the best and most successful Rome narrative I've ever heard. That's for listeners, that's in Act 3, when he's talking about, I went to Rome and the Pope basically said, get out of here and you're condemned and so on. And he tells us to Wolfram. To
but
me, yeah,
even more than Zeifert, because for me Zeifert is the pinnacle, and I love Johann Botha, but for me Zeifert is the pinnacle of what I think Tannhäuser can be as a character and as a person being as a singer. You know,
yeah.
there's he never looks like and Botha didn't either. There was never a bit of strain for him to sing this role. Um, but for me, Zeifert just makes it sound beautiful all the time,
Oh, yeah.
and and not just sort of barky. Sometimes, it can have a tendency, especially in the tough bits, to become sort of barky. Uh, yeah, and for me, that's the gold standard. I want to be like Zeifert, and hopefully better one day. But that to me is the bar.
So for listeners, you're referring to Peter Zeifert.
Yes, Peter Zeifert. Yeah.
Um, the reason I mentioned Botha in part because I have my many favorite Tannhäusers. I love any person who will sing it. Let's put it that way. The first production I worked on was with Richard Castley, who was a wonderful singer. We had Tatiana Troyanos as Venus and Rezanek as Elizabeth and Bernd Weichel as Wolfram and Levine conducting. And on one performance, which unfortunately happened to be the video, he had a vocal crisis, did Richard Castley in the third act. And it happens to the best singers, and it happened to him. And we pondered having a replacement Tannhäuser come in while we were doing a live broadcast video. But he said, no, the character suffers. Let me just put it all in there. And it was, you can see it on video, one of the most moving performances, not necessarily for what he did vocally, but the musicianship and the acting and the feeling were extraordinary on that day, about 1982, I guess.
I've seen that. I had that on VHS.
Yeah.
I had that on VHS.
Back to Botha for a moment, because it's an interesting story for you and for our listeners. He was a profoundly religious man. He was from South Africa, very kind, deeply, deeply, deeply religious, so that all of his choices were informed by his religiosity, by his faith. And he, unfortunately, when he was singing those Tannhäusers at the Met, which were his last, was ill with cancer, but had told very few people. I knew it. And I went to all four performances, in part out of friendship, but in part because you just wanted to be there. And that last of the four, which is the one that exists on video, he knew it was it. And all of his religious feeling, but all of his anger about being ill and dying at the age of 51 were in that performance. And it's captured on video. It's one of the most extraordinary things you will see, because given that it was the last Rome narrative, the last everything, Heilige Elizabeth, bitte für mich, as he lay dying, um, it was one of those rare circumstances that we don't want, where life completely flooded art and brought things to a performance that we see once in a lifetime.
Wow.
And so, but even with that, with his illness, he did the Rome narrative in a very impressive, very feeling way. So before we leave Tannhäuser, because we could do just 2 more hours on Tannhäuser, Russell, a part of the score, if you've not gotten to it yet, that I think is just some of the greatest opera music ever written, is after Dich teure Halle, where there's the conversation between Tannhäuser and Elizabeth. And conductors and stage directors often try to rush through that to get to the entry of the guests, and all of, actually they've entered, they've left, and then they have to come back in for the singing competition. But it's this wonderful conversation, and the music in it is so telling in the orchestra about how Tannhäuser and Elizabeth, who have not had any physical contact, connect.
Yeah.
And the storytelling in the music is great. Now, let me get this straight. She sings Dich teure Halle, they have the conversation, then the guests come in. I
Yes.
wanted to correct that. So it's before the entry of the guests, they have their private conversation. And just read those pages and listen to the music for what Wagner does in the orchestra, and it'll unlock all kinds of things for you about Tannhäuser, but also about Elizabeth. And her music there is just exquisite. Yours is good, hers is exquisite.
Well, I'm getting back to that score, and it's on my schedule to get back to it in November.
Very
Because
good. So now let's get to Mr. Otello.
okay.
The first question I have for you on that is not the one that everyone asked you, but a different one. You know the question, we know the answer. Namely, you sang in Nabucco in 2016 with Placido Domingo as Ismaele. You were 7 performances. You were terrific. Everybody, Jamie Barton was in that cast, Ludmila Monastirska. Domingo, I think, was a great Nabucco, not the world's best, but he was a great Nabucco. Levine conducted, my friend Elijah Moshinsky, it was his production. And it was fine, very fine all around. Were you contemplating Otello, and did you talk to Domingo about Otello during this run?
I think at that point, Otello was um, being discussed as a concert performance, because it was a concert in Atlanta. So I think at that time it was being discussed. Uh, Domingo actually came to me and said, "You should sing Otello," and I thought, maybe. I'm thinking about it, and I said I want to do it in concert first, and he said, "Otello in concert." Okay, it's like, how do you sing Otello in concert? It was his sort of his reaction, but yeah, it was definitely on my mind at that time. I think we were talking about it um, with the leadership at the Atlanta Symphony, uh, but no, we didn't have any deep conversation about it then. After I'd done the concert version, uh, I saw Domingo. I want to say I believe in LA, and we did discuss it then briefly, um, but we never like sat down and like had a drink and really talked about the role. He offered it, but there was never really a time to make that happen. I wish I had. I wish I had a time to
You still can.
talk to somebody like I can, but at this point, I've done too many of them, and I don't think I don't think I want to do very many more of them, because it becomes a political statement these days to sing a part that I just wanted to sing since I was a teenager. When someone told me that I could sing, and when I knew I was a tenor, uh, Kalaf Don Jose and Otello were the three things that I just wanted to sing more than anything else. And I've now done Otello and Jose, and I was supposed to do Calaf and haven't gotten there yet. But yes, so to answer your question, yeah, we did talk about it, but not in any great detail. No.
What would you ask him now that you've done it a few times and you've thought about it? You've done it in concert in LA and Atlanta and in performance in Toronto. Now, what would you ask?
The tricky thing about Otello is how the greater Otellos, the best ones that we think about, they don't sing the whole score, if that makes sense. It's almost like they're speaking parts of the role, and I haven't learned how to do that yet. And it saves you so much resources, but it's almost like they're just speaking or intoning the role or sort of on pitch. They're not like singing every phrase. They're not singing every line. And
Dio mi potevi, for
yeah, yes,
example.
but for example, yes, but that one's sort of that spoken part is written in, but there are other parts. There's like you sing ah mi le vita li on the ha se di or you sing those phrases, and then everything that happens after that is almost like spoken. Um, it takes, I think, experience in the part to learn how to do that. Um, that I don't think I had as I started to do the stage performances of them. The concert performances of them were very easy because you just stood there and you sang it. But when you have to put on 20 pounds of costume, run around, roll around on stage, and do all of this stuff that I know that I could just imagine that Del Monaco would have like slapped somebody for even suggesting even suggesting that he do those things. Uh, but stage directors want you to, again, is back to what I was saying about all the things. Audiences and directors have sort of created this idea that for it to be acting, it has to be physical or overtly physical. And one of the things that I love about someone even like Vickers, as we've been talking about him quite a bit, is that there was a lot of mental intelligence that or mental acting that sort of happened at the same time as the physicality. But with that being said, I mean, yeah. Anyway, it's a lot. It's a lot in terms of the part just emotionally, and when you have to then put costumes and run around the stage on top of it. Literally in the Act Three Concertate, in the production that I've done the most, Otello's running, 6, 7 yards in one direction, 6, 7 yards in another direction, 6, 7 yards in another direction, and having to sing at the same time. Pick up a chair that's enforced so it doesn't break, and hurl it across the stage at the beginning of the concertate to start singing. That is a lot of energy just gone immediately. The Dio mi potevi laying on the ground on your back, those kind of things. Not impossible, but again, the physical demands of that takes away from what you have for vocal resources. And sort of that's sort of been my experience with it. And I did too many performances in 2019 of it. I thought if the role was in my throat and I kept singing it, that it would be easier, or it just keeps me sort of in that wheelhouse vocally. But that wasn't the brightest idea. It didn't cause me any vocal harm, but it was a lot. So by the time I got to the performances in Washington D.C., uh, I was tired. I was physically just tired. It didn't. I couldn't do a whole lot more.
Based on your study of the part of Verdi and Boito, do you think that they wanted parts that were more spoken or sung, or has that evolved as performance practice?
I think they wanted it spoken. I think that's they wanted it. They were. I think they were going for Shakespeare. I think that's what they were going for. They were going for uh, you know they were going for Shakespeare, and the singing was just the vehicle for that. But they really wanted it to be uh, recitation, and I think, again, I think with experience, my next one is in next a year from now. I'm doing it in Covent Garden. Um, but I think by that time I will be able to do more with it from that point of view, because now I have the experience of singing it. I think however many performances at this point, I think 20 something performances at this point. I've had that experience now, and I think I can now take that into this new this production, this new run of performances. Um, with that in mind, that you don't have to sing everything. Find the moments where you can simply just speak them. The role fits like a glove. Act one, act two, the first half of act two, before this part that I read before the ora per sempre. Before you get there, um, before you get to this point, it's all quite a very lyric role. And there, you look in the orchestration, there are all these P's written, pianissimo, like four P's written under sometimes when you're singing. No one plays it that way, and no one conducts it that way. But that's what's on the page. And I would like to. I've tried in my performances to find that, but once you get to the point after that, it's now then let's find the sort of moments where you can speak, moments where you can just recite text, and I haven't found that yet.
Isn't that great about a role when you can grow with it and work with it and learn from it?
Absolutely, but and as I said, now everything is sort of a political statement. I got contacted from the Covent Garden press team, and it's like, oh, we want to talk about this will be our first ever Black Othello. I think the first that they've ever had at Covent Garden. Okay, that's fine, but why does it make a difference? You know, and I said, can we please not make this about being black, and make this about makeup? I know I'm black. You all know I'm black. The world knows I'm black. Why can't let's make it about the art at this point? Because now it's becoming too much about how does it feel to be black and sing Othello. It feels the same to be black and sing, Nemorino. It feels the same to be black and sing Titus. Um, but that's the part that's becoming a bit frustrating at this point.
Yep.
And I guess because I'm also, as an advocate for black artists. I talk about these issues a lot, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why that conversation comes up so much. But I think it's we can focus on equity and inclusion, and also on art, as in the context of both being the same, being one, but as also their own separate entities. Like Othello, me being black and singing Othello doesn't have to be a political statement. It should be because I can sing Othello.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can send them this clip so you don't have to repeat yourself in 2 years. But my friend, I need to ask you a question now, since you raised it, not about being black and being a singer. Why those wimps, Don Jose and that selfish Calaf, the two tenor roles I most dislike, which doesn't mean I know musically they have a lot to offer, but I can't think of two more unsympathetic characters in the tenor repertory. The Duke of Mantua can be unsympathetic, except his music is so sympathetic that you got to love him despite the awful things that he does. But I was emailing the other day with a colleague friend of ours and who sings Carmen, and she said that she wants to stab him in act two before just be done with him in act two. And we fantasized about then Michaela will get woke and join the gang and go steal, and then he would go off with a picador and Carmen would go off with a toreador and the bull will live. And we rewrote the whole opera. Um, yes, he has great music, and you don't have to play perfect characters because Tannhäuser is not perfect. But what is it about Don Jose that appeals to you in Carmen?
Yeah, he is absolutely annoying. He is so annoying, but he has great music to sing, and that last duet, the final duet, is the duet with Michaela. To see that duet in the first act, and then the duet in the end, it's just there's again this journey there. Um, as a character that I appreciate. Also, it was the first opera I ever saw live, so
Okay.
I have a close or an intimate sort of feeling about it because of that. There's a nostalgic part of it, and being that I'm a tenor and I'm a singer, to sing, and it was one of those operas that I really felt like I had to wait a while to sing. I've only done it once or twice now. Once in Canada, uh, and it's a beautiful music to sing. He's not the most interesting character. Again, you sort of have milk toast in the beginning, and then you have this really interesting person at the end, who's just jealous, and in the middle he just gets on your nerves because he's like lurking. He's like somebody who's just like stalking everybody on stage. No one really wants him there. No one even pays attention to him. No one talks to him. He sort of inserts himself into everybody else's business the entire time in the middle of the show.
And what a rotten son he is.
Just
Call your mother. She's not feeling well.
refuses to go home to his mom. Yes.
Put us all out of our misery. So that's him. Now, the other one who's a creep is Kalaf, who, yes, the music is extraordinary, but here is this most selfish of men who is willing to let all kinds of people die so he could get it on with a princess who doesn't want him. And to me, that's the synthesis of the opera plus great music. Three riddles, and then it's like a bad game. Once he solves the riddles, then okay, now she's yours. And then he says, "Il mio nome non sa," you don't know my name. Dimmi il mio nome prima dell'alba, e all'alba morirò. In other words, if you guess my name before dawn, then I will die at dawn. So everyone has to stay up all night, Nessun dorma, so you get to sing an aria. And meanwhile, people are killed and slaughtered. His father is beaten up. It's gruesome.
Yes, I think that oversimplification of it does sound a little horrible, but it's more that no, I don't want you to, how can I say this? It's like, I don't know, whatever the most beautiful person you imagine to be, and someone tells you that you can have them only if you do this, and you win. He won, okay, but then she's like, "Oh, I don't really want you," but he's like, but I won, but I don't really want you. So, but okay, here's the thing, and I guess did he know that she'd fall in love with him, getting to know his name? I doubt it. But I think that's we can't forget that part, But yes, but people do suffer for love. People do suffer for love. It's never easy.
Well,
It's
let
never
them, but not millions of Chinese, be slaughtered in the process.
well.
And poor Liu, who's the only sympathetic or the most sympathetic character, along with
Yeah.
Ping, has his moments, and the father certainly we feel for him, and the old grandfather Altum, the emperor, we feel for him. Basta sangue, no more blood.
Right.
But all Altum sees is people dying. And in the Met production by Zeffirelli, which I worked on, there are these 36 heads on poles. It's so gruesome. And
Yeah.
someone else, the Prince of Persia, sent off to be beheaded, and Turandot goes like this. And it's nonstop gore and promotion of violence just so two stubborn people can get their way.
But isn't that the way life works though? It's listen. I think it's a silly story, but the music is just phenomenal. The riddle, seeing Gwyneth Jones as a teenager sing the riddle scene is something that's like emblazoned on my memory, and I will never ever forget.
It was phenomenal. I remember it as well.
Hearing Danny
Um,
Silva sing it as well is one of those things that, again, that was you talk about voices that sort of like stop singing and that you still feel them sort of reverberating around
did you
you.
say Dimitrova?
Yes,
Okay,
she
Dana
was
Dimitrova.
Nina Dimitrova. She was one of those. She was one of those singers for me. I saw her sing Santuzza as a kid. I saw her sing Turandot, and it was like when she sang, my body vibrated, and that was an experience I only experienced very few times. You know, Simon Estes singing uh, Wotan or Dutchman also had that experience for me as well. But yeah, it's phenomenal, phenomenal. I love the opera only
Okay.
because it's the best music. It's the best music.
It's phenomenal music. If you do it, I'll come. Um, but you bring to mind Gana Dimitrova. I have two Dimitrova stories. She was a Bulgarian dramatic soprano, a very lovely woman. And my first story is this, that at the Met, she was the standby for Eva Martone, who one night was unable to perform. And I had to come out and make the speech to the audience and, good in my tuxedo, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Already I was pelted with groans because sometimes you say, no, everyone's singing and then they cheer. But in this case, I had to deliver the news that Miss Eva Martone, groan, is unwell and regrets that she is unable to perform, groan. And in her place will be soprano Gana Dimitrova. And someone yelled out, who's that? I said, Gana Dimitrova. Look at it this way. You lose a Martone, you gain a Dimitrova. So that's how that performance.
That is awesome. But to think
That's
Nina
yeah.
Dimitrova was the stand-in for Eva Martin, that's wild for me.
When I worked at the Met, our cover system was glorious. One night, I had to do the speech again, and ladies and gentlemen, it was Baldwin Moscata. No, it was Louisa Miller. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jose Carreras, groan, is unable to perform tonight. In his place, the Met is pleased to announce that the role of Rodolfo will be sung by Luciano Pavarotti. Cheers. My second Dimitrova story, in a way, relates to some of the things we were talking about before, and it's worth telling. I wrote about it in my book, Opera 101, but without naming her, but now I think I can name her. She was doing Tosca at the Met a number of years ago, and she's no longer with us, so a number of years ago. It was a very fine Tosca, lovely woman, very passionate, great singing and great vocal presence. And she just was not in her best mood. And I spoke to her and I asked her, and she confided to me that her husband was dying and that she was very focused on him. And when she would sing Vici d'arte and then have to see that her lover Mario was going to die, non morire così, all of that stuff, that she was reenacting in her head every night her husband's eventual death.
Hmm.
But she was emotionally a bit unhinged by that, understandably. She came back a couple of years later to do the same role when I spoke to her. And she said, now that it's past, now I can recreate those feelings when I sing her, but without losing my control.
Yeah.
And while the first run, when he was still with us, were very feeling and the audience didn't know, so some said, well, she's not so good. The ones that she did when she came back and invested the memory into the performance were phenomenal.
Awesome. It's amazing that the people don't realize what we go through on to create this on stage night after night. Whether it's a breakup, whether it's an ill kid or family member, or you yourself being unwell, but you can't afford to not sing on a given night because if you don't sing, you don't make money. Um, uh, I don't think people realize. Maybe they have to know, but I don't think they think about this because they're in the theater to escape their own lives. They don't want to think about or worry about yours,
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's worth talking about. It's worth discussing all the other crap that we have to deal with as artists just to get on stage, to make it happen night after night. You know.
Well, I'm not dropping names here, but I am a little bit, but I'm not hurling it to the ground. this is not opera, but it's almost. The singer, actress, entertainer, Nell Carter was a very good friend of mine.
Okay.
And Nell was a really great singer in her repertory and pondered opera. She loved opera. She wanted to sing Amneris. And I said, you could do Despina, but you can't do Amneris. And she said, I'm done playing maids. But vocally, she could have done Despina. But she and Liza Minnelli and I were once having dinner. That's where I'm really not dropping names, but I cooked. It was in Nell's apartment. Liza was there. I listened to their conversation. I was in the kitchen, so I was not in the conversation. And Nell and Liza had a difference of opinion about something that was fascinating for me to hear. Nell said, if you're not at your best, don't go on, even if you lose the money, because they'll remember that you didn't sound your best. Liza said, these people have paid their money. They've traveled a long way. They know we're not perfect. They want to see Liza Minnelli. They want to see Nell Carter and say that they've had that experience. And she said, if we're not our best, at least we tried. And Nell said basically no. Nell was very firm in her opinions, which is fine. But I've always thought about that dichotomy because I've known artists in our opera world who take both opinions.
Yeah.
And some have even said to me they're willing to lose money when they need it because they don't want to leave the impression that something's not right.
Yeah, for me, I'm of the Liza camp as well. But
Which
I'm
is redundant, the Liza camp. But anyway.
yes. But I think there's a lot of validity to what Nell Carter says as well. But for me, it's more there's some performances where you know or think, oh, well, people are coming to that performance to see you, and there are other performances they're not coming to see you because you're not the person that is the draw. If there is a person that's a draw, I think when you consider all the factors, I think it's important. What I don't like is the singer that has a tickle and then they say, make an announcement that I won't be my best during the performance. You've had to have do that job and you know what I'm talking
God,
about.
yes.
But what happens is then the audience has to worry about you, and that's not, again, it's not their jobs. They didn't come there to worry about you, and for me as an artist to put that responsibility on them to be worried about my ability to get through the night, um, I always thought that it was unfair to an audience. So if I'm not feeling well, and if I know I can sing, but it's not going to be a good night, I'm going to go out there and sing. Now, maybe if it were an opening night, would I go out there? Maybe not. But just an off night in a run, or a non-subscription performance kind of thing, or a non-broadcast performance, why not? Unless I felt like I was going to hurt myself, and then that's different. That's a completely different situation. But I do agree that I think, for the most part, when money is involved, and not just about my own money but about other people paying money to see someone, I can only imagine those people who paid money to see Luciano, um, and then they got someone else on stage in the night. I find, I know there was a famous thing where Lechitra, Salvatore Lechitra, filled in for Luciano in a performance. It sort of catapulted him. But I can only imagine, having been someone who paid a few $100 to see Luciano that night, and then I got this upstart that I didn't know who he was. I would have been, very upset.
Well, I can speak to that personally. It seems I'm always cooking. Um, I was with Luciano on those three performances where Luciano and I were close friends. I don't say that about everyone in this field. We're all colleagues. He and I were actual close friends for 29 years, and I was often at his place and would cook, and we'd just hang out and shoot the breeze and not necessarily talk about opera, but
Right.
talk about all kinds of other things in Italian. And Luciano genuinely was sick. And when he was sick, but even not, he liked a special broth that his mother made and his wife knew how to make, and I knew how to make. So I went over there and basically made him the broth for the several days that he just lived on the broth. He didn't get better because he had a lung and a chest and a nose, and he was in his 60s. And this was to be his Met farewell. And Carol Vaness, and I believe Sam Raimi, maybe James Morris, I'd have to check, or the Scarpia. And he was very unhappy that he couldn't perform. And he did come back a couple of years later when he was very compromised just to appear. But the New York Post was cruel, said the fat man won't sing. The Met management was a bit impatient with him, and I thought they treated him cruelly. The management of then, these are not the people now. And it was very sad because he really did want to sing, and he was not that much of a counselor. I think some viewers know I was the consultant on the documentary that was done about him by Ron Howard. And we know that Luciano canceled 28 times in Chicago. And I knew the reason then, and it's mentioned in the documentary, so we can say it now. His daughter was very ill in a hospital in New York, and he did not want to leave New York to go anywhere. It was not dissing Chicago. He wouldn't go anywhere because he was present for his daughter while his wife was in Italy with the other two daughters. And he was being a responsible father, and his daughter thankfully recovered, but she was gravely ill.
Hmm.
And he didn't want to have it made public that he was tending to his very ill daughter, who was a teenager in a hospital in New York City. So that's why he canceled, but he became saddled with that reputation of being a canceller,
Oh, okay.
and sort of, just impulsive. No, it really was not that. So when the New York Post was very cruel to him, I was very sad for that. So I made an extra good broth. I made a lot of it. And, he was a marvelous man. No one's perfect, but he was a marvelous man.
I
Um,
wish I would have met him. I wish I would have met him. Definitely. I saw him sing those. I saw him sing Tosca as a kid in Miami,
mhm.
uh, and then I saw those last Toscas in New York uh, uh, with Carol, and I forget who else was in it. But yeah, I saw those last performances in at the Met.
Sometime when you and I are in a room together, I'm going to tell you a Miami story, but I don't tell the story in public.
I look forward to it.
um, I want to ask you a couple of other things, and then unfortunately, I love this visit with you, my friend, but I got to get going. You've
Okay.
provided a very interesting and good list of things to listen to for our Idagio audiences, and Charles Nidick, the clarinet, and the one I want to ask you about. There are Songs of America, Gilbert Kalish, various composers, Dreams of a New Day, songs by Black composers with Will Liverman, the baritone, singing, Robert Owens, just excellent stuff. But I want to ask you specifically about the Olivier Messian Quartet for the End of Time, which has a piano, a violin, a cello, and again, our clarinet. It's 50 minutes long. It was written by Messian in a prisoner of war camp in Germany during the Second World War. And he was a very religious man. And I looked up some of his writings about this in preparation for talking to you. And he wrote that is published at the Carnegie Hall website, by the way, that when he was taken to the camp, he was carrying some musical scores. And like all the prisoners, he was stripped naked, and he would not let go of the musical scores, and he held on to them. And the people who were running the camp at first questioned that, and what is this? And then they looked at it, and he said, because so many Germans love music, they allowed me to keep the music, and they gave me paper, pencils, and erasers to write music. And so he wrote this in a prisoner of war camp. Why, Russell, did you pick this particular piece of music?
Because of that story. And as a young man in Miami, I heard uh, um, this piece played. Not I The first time I heard it played was on the radio, and it was this same recording, I think, with Cavafian and Fred Sherry. Um, that I heard on the radio. But when I was much younger, maybe 20 years ago or so, in New York at a chamber music concert, I heard Charlie Nidage play this piece. And I saw for the first time this cyclical breathing thing that he did. And I was crazy about that. I didn't know a whole lot about this piece of music. And then I got to know this piece of music more in depth and the stories behind it maybe in 2005 when I was a student at the Marlborough Festival. I learned of the story of Messian being in the camp and fighting to keep his scores and the folks running the camp allowing him to compose music. That story to me is one of those that are how talking about Tannhäuser for you makes you get goosebumps. For me, it's this story and the will and the power of music, in the worst possible times, makes me get a little emotional. It's
Mhm.
embarrassing, but it's so powerful. Um, uh, yeah, and that piece of music taught me that lesson in a very profound way. In a very profound way.
So my final question for you, I feel you've answered in the last hour and 40 minutes, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, I'll ask you another question first. We'll put off the pleasure of the last question.
Okay.
You are now an artist in residence for LA Opera, Los
Yeah.
Angeles Opera. Talk about that. It's through the 23-24 season. Did they approach you? Did you have ideas? Did you go to them? How did this evolve and what do you plan to do?
This evolved from a Facebook post. I made a post on Facebook saying that I wanted a job in opera and I'd probably be willing to stop singing to do it. And Christopher Couch, being this most amazing man that he is, called me, wrote me, and we had a phone
Christopher
conversation.
Kelch is the CEO of LA Opera,
Yes.
Aoelsch.
Yes. The in the next days we had a phone meeting, and he basically said, "Let's create something that you can do where you can sing and your work, your advocacy work, and your mentoring work, and make it all sort of come together." And I said yes, but on one condition, sort of, is that I want you and the staff of LA Opera to teach me how to run an opera company. And he agreed. He said, "I think that's a fabulous idea, and I will embed with the various departments to learn how they work and to learn how to do those jobs, or at least be familiar enough with them so that in the time that I decide that I want to become an artistic director somewhere, a general director somewhere, I would have had that training by those departments at a major institution like LA, Los Angeles Opera, um, and the staff there has been amazing. I they've been absolutely amazing. Uh, helping me out, helping me understand things, answering questions, helping set up some things that I want to do. For instance, I'm starting a program that I've started a program that they've named after me, the Russell Thomas Youth Artists and Training Academy,
Oh,
where it's sort of modeled off of a program that I learned about in St. Louis, where the Opera Theater of St. Louis takes high school students, give them lessons in drama, music, uh, you know, voice lessons, and guides them through their high school careers, through undergrad, and sort of help them out. And they can always come back if they needed money for voice lessons and that kind of thing. And uh, and I wanted to do something like that for the Los Angeles County area, and to bring, to maybe discover the next Russell Thomas or the next, whoever, in that process. I think um, it's been very successful in St. Louis. I don't know of any other place that does anything like it. And I wanted to sort of recreate that, or a version of that in LA. And everyone has been so open and amazing, and their education outreach or connects director Stacy Brightman has been awesome in helping me facilitate and create this program. So that's one, and the other is an HBCU virtual sort of training program where we'll teach students from historically black colleges and universities. That's what the HBC&U stands for. Um, to About what happens in the opera company from again all the departments, and also help them with their own singing and coaching them and giving them ideas about repertory, technical things that they need to work out. Maybe give them some help there as well, some coachings. To help them with their auditions and their own repertoire. And we just selected 10 singers yesterday, and we're sending out their acceptances in the next few days to find out, if they're all still committed to participating. And I'm really excited about it. And we've called on others in the opera community to help us out. The general director at Fort Worth Opera, Afton Battle, who's a good friend of mine, is going to come in and talk to them as well. We've reached out to singers who graduated from HBCUs and are making a career in the business, to come and talk to them as well. And so we're trying to just make a support system or community for them in the business of active performers and administrators, so that they can know that there is a place for them, because oftentimes these young black kids don't realize that that they're, or they don't feel welcomed in these spaces. And not just the young ones, even sometimes myself, I don't feel welcome in these spaces. And I've been talking to my friends and colleagues who are now getting these jobs as administrators at opera companies, and they're having a hard time and unfortunately, most of the job is navigating other people's feelings about them and having to prove themselves. And it's a huge waste of time. But unfortunately, it's the way we as Black and Latino and Asian people have to operate in classical music. It's very unfortunate, but I want them to sort of get a head start on some of this stuff. And I have high hopes that it will be successful, and at least they will know or feel welcomed or know that there's a support group, and start the process of networking in the professional operatic world, because oftentimes that's very difficult.
I don't know. Are there any historically Black colleges and universities in Southern California?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think
We'll
so.
have to look into it.
So they're
Um,
mostly centered in the on the East Coast and the South.
yes, sometime you and I will get together for Stone Crab or Not Bananas and talk about LA Opera, because as it happens, I was there at the very beginning. I was hired by Peter Hemmings, who was the first head of the company, and worked there a lot in the early and middle years of the company. It's a wonderful company. I'm very glad you
Awesome.
have them and they have you. Um, it leads me to what was my first question and final question that you've answered abundantly, but I'm going to just say it anyway. I started this conversation by saying that you are a singer's singer. I also wanted to add that you, more than almost anyone else, the only one I would paragon with you was Christine Gerke, who I heard both of you in Cincinnati eons ago in Fidelio, and that's the first time you and I spoke. And that both of you seem destined to become heads of opera companies, but also you two are, in America at least, the most respected in the profession, and you're looked to as leaders. And I don't know if you sought to assume the role, whether you are a great leader like Otello, or just that it's part of who you see yourself as or see yourself wanting to do. But number one, do you agree that you and Christine just have particular roles in our community?
I think so. I think I think they're very different, but I think we both have a group of singers or a group of colleagues that I'm sure, call on us for various things. I know for myself, it's always been a part of me to advocate for my colleagues, more even than myself. I often would advocate for my colleagues, if it's something in the working condition that sort of didn't work right, or uh, something in a working situation that was unfair. I would probably be the person to speak up first, um, because I wanted to make sure that, you know that we're all in a comfortable situation, and opera is about the singers first, and sometimes people forget that, and we're sort of treated as the afterthought. The singers are often treated as the afterthought, and if there's ever been a way for me to change that, or to change that perception, or to bring in a perception where the singer was the most respected person in the room, then I'm going to work hard to make that happen. So yes, it's sort of something that I've assumed, but because I've wanted to assume that position as um, a, a person my colleagues can come to advocate for them, to talk to about sensitive things, and know that they have somebody that has their back. That Black artists know that they have somebody speaking up for issues that affect them, and the same for Asian and Latino artists as well. But they have somebody they can come to speak to them about these issues.
Mhm. Anything else you want to add? This has been a wonderful visit, Russell, is all I have to say. And I thank you. And I think that people may have had some sense about you and your gifts and your heart. I think I managed to get a lot more out of you today, which I'm happy to have done. And I thank you for your generosity in every sense of that word.
Thank you so much thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the time and the ability to talk to the Idagio community about what's going on.
Very good. I'll see you soon, live and in person. I look forward to it. Be
Thank you.
well.
Bye.
Bye, Russell. Thank you.